It is exactly 33 minutes past 10 and welcome to the second part of your favorite Pan-African show, Bottomline Africa. We're glad you stayed with us. Now, the new Environment Cabinet Secretary, that is Keriako Tobiko, has warned Kenya Forest Service personnel of a massive illegal logging in government forests. Speaking on his first official day in office, Tobiko warned that he will weed out rogue Kenya Forest Service rangers and empower those found fit to fully protect forest, water towers and wetlands in the country. Now, furious, Tobiko said he was unhappy with reports the forest rangers were colluding with traders and harvesting timber in government forest without permits. Let's listen into what he had to say exactly before the discussion.
Now, today, in the media, in one of the headlines, plastic bags that were banned, and Kenya received all the accolades. How do you imagine getting out into the neighboring jurisdiction, coming in? NEMA is under instruction as of this morning. Even as we engage our colleagues across the border, and where? Even as we engage, of course, our borders are porous. Even as we engage customs and border patrols and interior, NEMA must undertake and is under very clear instructions a crackdown. Relentless crackdown. In markets, supermarkets, in manufacturers, and that has to be sustained. Let me tell you this. There is no going back. If anyone is deluding themselves that the ban can be lifted through some insidious back, no. On the issue of plastic bottles, we will discuss that, and already I'm getting full briefs about. NEMA must do its job.
Well, that is the tough talk we've been talking about. That is the newly appointed Cabinet Secretary for Environment and Natural Resources, Keriako Tobiko. Now, let's begin our studio discussion tonight. And once again, let me reintroduce our guest. We have Peter Odengo, is Environment Consultant and Green Economy Champion. We also have Michael O'Brien Onyenka, Senior Vice President, Conservation International Africa Division. Of course, Michael is joining me via Skype. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the program.
Good evening.
And let me begin with Michael. Michael, I'm sure you know the newly appointed Environment CS, the Kenya's newly appointed Environment CS. We're going to talk about him shortly. But let's talk about the whole continent. Apparently, Africa is the second largest, the second most populous continent. And with it, I'm sure comes a long list of, environmental concerns. From your own experience, which one do you think perhaps poses the greatest risk to the environment in Africa?
Yusuf, I'm really happy to be on the show. There are so many environmental issues, conservation-related issues afflicting Africa. But I think at the base of the whole challenge, the challenges we are facing is the historical low premium we've placed on our vast natural wealth or natural capital. We don't value them, we take them for granted. And that is why those, like the CS is saying, those entrusted with the position to protect and preserve these key natural resources are colluding with criminals, organized criminal syndicates, which means they don't really understand what they are entrusted with. It's like a doctor colluding, a surgeon colluding with criminals to harvest organs. That's the same analogy you can use, and it's shocking, right? And we totally support the CS in his being very unambiguous about the direction that the ministry is going and that he himself is going. And I think he has the full support of the entire conservation community in Kenya. and around Africa. We do face a lot of problems. We have the second largest tropical rainforest in the world is the Congo Basin, and it's disappearing at the rate of 1 football pitch per minute. It's really worrying, and we need more political will that like the CS is displaying to really get the good policy framework in place, enforcement framework, and also bring on board the Wananchi, the Joe public, to understand the values of these natural resources and why the government are working hard to preserve them, not just for ourselves, but for future generations, our children's children.
Yes, well said, Michael. Now, Peter, Michael talks about the need to have, good governance to end corruption. They need to have some sort of a good political will. And at the moment, about 70% of energy in Africa is generated from burning wood and coal. And at the moment, Peter, there is a new plant in Lamu, apparently. It's a coal plant in Kenya. There are several other plants, mainly funded by the Chinese in various countries in Africa. What does this say about the commitment of this government, not just Kenyan government, but governments across the continent in conserving environment?
Thank you very much indeed. It is very difficult to say with accuracy on the commitment of the African governments, because at the moment, indeed, there are a number of alternatives, and you hear that a number of people are still talking of clean coal, clean biomass. The truth of the matter that there are enough legislative framework. There is also a good technological advancements which requires that there must be a political goodwill. There are alternatives. There are laws and there are structures and there are skills that are able to transform this continent, as Obrian just have said. As a green champion, there is no shortcut. It has to be done now and not tomorrow. The institutions that have been given the mandate to enforce and ensure compliance and are not doing that is just like prisoners dancing with prison wardens in the same floor, and as that now they are all the same, whether it's a warden or a prisoner. So it is true, if you look at the international convention, the regional convention, the national laws, for example, Kenya has got one of the best laws, Climate Change Act, MCA, Environmental Management Coordination Acts, the conservation of the water. These things are there. We have to do it now and not tomorrow.
Yes. Well said. Michael, now let's talk about these coal plants. They keep on coming up in various countries in Africa, including Kenya. I understand coal as a source of energy has been banned in several, European and Western countries. So what does that say about, government's commitment in saving environment in this continent?
Thank you. It is really sad that we are still going on about coal power plants. To put it in context, it's like aiming and spending money to import or put in place coal trains, which was so last century. Coal power plants are such an old technology that I can't remember the last time a coal power plant was built in Europe. And yet, in Africa, understandably, we have a massive energy deficit. But we are opportune in the sense that we don't have to make the same mistakes like Europeans and the Americans have made, and they are suffering the consequences now. We can leapfrog our energy pathway the same way that the telephone industry leapfrog across analog to digital. There is no reason why we should be pursuing coal energy. Look at South Africa, for example, the largest energy generator in sub-Saharan Africa, responsible for 49% of all energy generated in sub-Saharan Africa. 80% of the energy comes from coal. Those coal power plants, apart from the environmental degradation and pollution, they also utilize 10,000 liters of fresh water per second in order to operate in a water-stressed country. So don't be surprised with the water scarcity in Cape Town, and I believe Gauteng province is the next. So we shouldn't make the same mistake in Kenya. Going back to the Lamu port, right? Lamu is a critical mangrove ecosystem. People don't understand the role of mangroves. Apart from being a buffer for coastal states in the context of rising sea waves, it's also the breeding ground for fish, not just in Kenya, but from South Somalia to northern Mozambique Channel. That's the critical importance of the Lamu mangrove system, ecosystem in Kenya. So when you build the coal power plant and the advanced massive teapot, without proper environmental management, you're going to have massive pollution spills that will degenerate and degrade the critical mangrove system, which will then impact on millions of coastal communities who rely on fishing for their livelihood. So we can't just do things without taking a full picture, a holistic approach. You might do something that looks nice on one side and you do a triple damage on the other side, and the net is a net loss.
Well explained, Michael. Unfortunately, we couldn't get in touch with any of the officials from the government who will have rather told us, or we could have posed those tough questions too. But of course, we do hope that we're going to get the minister, the newly appointed environment minister, soon, and is going to answer those questions with regard to the Lamu coal plant. Now, Peter, let's talk about the newly appointed CS for environment. He was talking very tough. You've seen from that soundbite. He had talked about, he had tough warning for illegal logging and enforcement of plastic bags ban. We're going to talk about plastic ban bags shortly. But let's talk about millers who harvest beyond, their required quotas. And many observers believe that this is because there's some sort of laxity in law enforcement on illegal logging.
It is true. The minister was not talking tough. Indeed, that is what is supposed to be done by the people who are given the responsibility. First of all, just to emphasize that we must undertake what is called the natural accounting systems of our natural resources. There is no reason why a logger or a miller can be given a huge chunk of a conservation area, which there is no plans to replenish such an area. And that the minister talked very candidly that the law enforcement agency, the authorities and the agencies that are given the responsibility to ensure compliance and enforcement must ensure compliance and enforcement. And that is what we did. What are the drivers of this massive environmental degradation? There are the big five. Number one, the rapid population growth in in the major regions within the continent. The second one is poverty, which is escalating and pushing people to areas which should be preserved for conservation, biodiversity sanctuaries. The third one is ecological ignorance, where you cannot put a figure onto a natural resource for current generation and for the future generation. And finally, it is also have to ensure that there must be compliance with the laws and regulations that is. The minister, if he can really, if he can enforce and ensure what he said today, I am assuring you as a green champion with the green champion, we will give him utmost support and you will see a change tomorrow and not the following day. Because we have all the regulatory frameworks that we achieve. For example, if I may degrade on the coal issue, the coastal area is one of the regions within this country which is well endowed with wind energy and even solar light, where they receive more or less 12 hours of solar in those areas. The cost of solar energy is now at par with other conventional energy. Take, for example, the geothermal in the Rift Valley region in Mombasa, where we have 10,000 megawatt capacity. And what is the cost of a megawatt of geothermal per kilowatt hour? It is 7 US cents. What is the cost of generating 1 kilowatt of a coal power? It is 0.75. So it means that you have to pay more. But now take at the externalities of those costs. You will find that the coal fire you will pay 15 and above. And what is that? That is double. So definitely we need to enforce the law. Environmental conservation is a calling. And it should be taken by the people who are championing the truth and not people who are lying and not people who are allowing what they are supposed to protect.
Yes, well said. Well said, Peter. Let me engage Michael for now. And Michael, apparently, the country that is Kenya, forest cover stands at 7.3% against the United Nations recommended percentage of 10%. Most other African countries are even below that. And apparently, Michael, that these rogue millers who apparently cut down trees and they don't even replant. I mean, how do you see the future of forest in this country, in this continent, perhaps?
I mean, it's what my friend was referring to earlier. There is nowhere in the world where you are serious about conservation. First of all, once you have a proper gazetting of your natural capital and recognize them as key economic input for the survival of a country, you have ecosystem accounts all the way at the treasury. You wouldn't be having this. You wouldn't go to Australia and cut 5,000 acres of trees without replanting them. You either double them or triple them, or at the minimum, you replace what you cut. That's zero deforestation. And so it's not surprising that if we keep cutting here and in the other parts of Africa, the aggregate impact of that is that over time, we've seen massive deforestation across West Africa and in East Africa, in Central Africa. It's a big problem. And all we need to do is not just, yes, laws are important, but I always say, like my friend was saying earlier, Kenya and many African countries have so many great laws. However, if we were to have a policy Olympics, Africa will win everybody hands down. The challenge is in implementation and enforcement. So you find that a lot of our governments sign all these treaties because it sounds nice to do. They don't even understand them. They lack the capacity to properly articulate them and enforce them and implement them. And sometimes they are quite shy to beg for help. And that's what organizations like Conservation International does. We go to government, we go to private sector, and we say, let's address the challenges you have, because they also ultimately become everyone's challenge. Again, looking at Cape Town, if Cape Town had taken judicious steps many years ago, we may not be talking about the zero. I mean, it looks like a Hollywood movie. In our lifetime, a major city, one of the best-run cities in Africa, actually, is going to run out of water. And if it can happen to Cape Town, it can happen to Nairobi, Lagos, Kampala easily. And so it is a question of having the political will, the right legal and policy frameworks, and the capacity and political will, again, to enforce them. And lastly, educate people about the true value. And I love what my colleague said earlier. We need to place true value on our natural capital, our natural wealth, because we take them for granted. Nature provides them for free, but they are not finite. They are not infinite resource. They can degrade and disappear if we don't manage them. And like I say all the time, when it comes to nature and the environment, when you abuse nature, there is no renegotiation, there are no bailouts, there are simply consequences. And Kenya is going to suffer the consequences of this decade-old abuse of critical water towers, mangroves, and so on. And now is the time for us to change track and do the right thing. And I'm so gladdened by the tone from the top that the CS is setting.
Well said, Michael. And they always say that nature doesn't forgive. Now, Peter, let's talk about the plastic ban, the enforcement of plastic bags ban in Kenya, apparently in Rwanda as well. Apparently, plastic bags are back in the Kenyan market once again. Have you seen them?
Of course, I've seen them, and I've seen people carrying them, and I said, where from? because as far as we know, it is banned here. Plastic ban is something which is long overdue, and nobody can argue about the plastic ban. Indeed, the cause why you still find a plastic bags sneaking into this country is simply because lack of enforcement and ensuring of the compliance. And there are authorities given that power by the Constitution, because the Constitution says, I, Peter Odengo, I need a cleaner and healthier environment. And plastic is one of them, and it is banned. How then does it come back here? Recently, I was in Rwanda. I didn't see anything plastic bag. So what we need to do, and we must take self-responsibility from the household level, from our schools, from the manufacturers. The argument that if you ban a plastic ban, then the youth will miss jobs. What is these jobs? The world is going green.
Let me get Michael's reaction to this. Michael, this is a Pan-African show, and we always talk about the whole continent. Apparently, Rwanda has banned plastic bags. Kenya has done the same, but Kenya is now blaming Uganda for, people smuggling in plastic bags from Uganda. Do you think this needs for some sort of a concerted effort by the East African community, ECOWAS, SADC, and all these bodies to collectively come together and, ban these materials together, instead of one country doing it and the other one missing in action?
I mean, that is very true. This is the reality of our existence today, that almost in every issue, it's not something you can do within your own geographic borders alone. Whether it be anti-poaching efforts, conservation of critical river causeways, and so on, because they cross different geographic borders, and therefore the East African community, in fact, the African Union, as part of Agenda 2060, should have it explicitly clear certain steps to be taken to meet Africa's INDCs and climate change targets. And plastic ban is one of the low-hanging fruits and the easiest to do, because there are alternatives. Talking about jobs, when you ban plastic bags, you create more jobs for local materials to be used in bags, as we are seeing in Kenya. Recycling. You create a whole new niche of industries. So the argument about job loss, companies closing down is neither here nor there. It doesn't have much water, because it's a changing context, it's a changing century, changing environment. And he said, the world is going green, and green is the new thing.
I think Africa should also do this, Michael. Let me just get your closing remarks, Michael and Peter. Let me begin with Peter. Apparently, it's always said that environmental conservation is a matter of life and death. We've seen so many African countries focusing on, manufacturing. They talk about universal health. Actually, it's among the 4 key agendas of the Jubilee government. Nobody is talking about climate change. Do you think there's need to have this kind of conversation happening more and more in the continent? As you make your final remarks.
Is one of the key pillars of life, because the impacts of climate change pervades several generations. Of course, I know, and I've been part of it, Kenya has done very well in terms of climate change. But what we need to do, we now need to take it out of the papers and implement and deliver the products and the impacts, and align all those climate change and what we signed during the Paris Agreement, what is signed as a part of our NDCs, the National Adaptation Plan, and the resources that are supposed to accompany it. One of the things that we should ensure, and I appeal to our new minister, that the climate finance should not be misused by anybody, because that is the live stream of my old grandmother in the village, who cannot access water, who cannot access fish, who cannot access githeri. And the children in the next decade will have nothing to eat, yet there is so much. We must take our action now as individuals, as leaders, and as everybody to realize this dream for the current and future generation.
Well said, Peter. We do hope the relevant authorities are listening to you. Michael, your final comment. You have about 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, climate change has no border. And the preservation of our critical ecosystems that we all rely on for climate mitigation, livelihood, and so on, it's not a popularity contest because it's a life and death battle. And we need to have strong political will, full buy-in from the citizenry, and everybody pulling together, both civil society, government, private sector, in our enlightened collective interest to make it work. We shouldn't be condoning.
Michael, I think from your end, you can hear the sound bed that signals the end of our program tonight. Unfortunately, we're out of time. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Michael O'Brien Onyeka is a Senior Vice President, Conservation International Africa Division. Also speaking to me earlier is Peter Odengo, Environment Consultant and Green Economy Champion. Thank you, gentlemen, for your input on the show. Now, before we wrap up the show tonight, I believe we have to cross over to our images of the day, and it comes from Libya, where cadets apparently performed naval drills during a graduation ceremony for a new batch of the Unity Government Special Operations Force.